Hello, I'm Dr. Bill and welcome to Dr. Bill 360, where we explore the essential world of organizational development, leadership training, and e-learning. Are you ready to transform your personal and professional skills and understanding? Join me as we delve into not just the what, but the how of turning your potential into performance. Let's begin this transformation on Dr. Bill 360. So in today's episode, I'd like to talk about cultural awareness and sensitivity. How we can assess it using the IDI or what's called the Intercultural Development Inventory. And lastly, how I applied that in my Ph.D. dissertation dealing with EFL or English as a Foreign Language teachers and intercultural competence. So in this first segment, we'll talk about the basics of cultural awareness and sensitivity and why it matters. The so what. So again, welcome to today's episode of Dr. Bill 360. We're going to deep dive into the basics of cultural awareness and sensitivity and discuss why they matter so much in today's interconnected world. But before we get started, some key points, some definitions of importance. For example, cultural awareness refers to recognizing and understanding differences and similarities between cultures. Sensitivity goes a step further, involving the ability to respect and value these differences in culture. Some people may not want to, but when I talk about values, right, I don't know if you've ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but don't worry. There'll be a link in the description of the episode and also post in CIWlearning.net website and also on the YouTube channel, Dr. Bill 360. So when we talk about values, I mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. I guess we should start there talking about Bloom's taxonomy. But briefly, why we need Bloom's taxonomy. When we do training and learning, the course and the content that we're looking at for training and learning, they have objectives. So we may have several lessons with corresponding slides, and each lesson has objectives. So at the end of each lesson, the participants, right, should be able to do something in accordance with the objectives, right? And then at the end of the course or workshop or whatever, when you leave and go back to your job, if I was to check back as the trainer, some 3 months later with your supervisor, he or she should say that the behavior or outcomes from the training, right, the behavior has changed to what is needed. So that's what we can do with the Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy basically has a triangle, right? Kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a triangle. But they have 3 domains for Bloom's taxonomy: the cognitive domain, affective domain, and psychomotor domain. Right? Cognitive, affective, dealing with feelings, and psychomotor, movement. So many people don't use the last 2 domains. They use the cognitive domain. So in this domain, we can do training, right? So when we look at the cognitive domain and the triangle, at the bottom of the triangle, we have remembering, then we have understanding, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So at the bottom for remember, I might ask you to list or state a particular element covered in the class. I'm basically asking you to remember something, right? But do you really understand it? I can also ask you to describe, discuss, or recognize, right? If you can't do that, right, you haven't gotten to that level, for example, of understanding, for example. So there's a saying, right? What gets measured gets assessed. I might ask you to apply it, maybe even. So that might sound something like demonstrate, implement, solve, use. Okay. So if I give you a scenario, for example, not tell you the answer, but give you a scenario, can you do what's required? For example, a person in front of you, clutches their chest and falls to the ground and seemingly loses consciousness. That should be all that's needed if you've learned, for example, first aid. Okay. So we give you that scenario and watch what you do. Can you demonstrate you can apply what you learn? And so on. So we can go on to the analysis stage, right? Comparing, contrasting, evaluating, appraising, defending, this kind of thing, all the way up to creation where you can assemble and construct. So that's the cognitive domain of Bloom's taxonomy. One of the other domains I'd like to talk about is the affective domain. Rarely used, right? So we're talking about respect and valuing. For example, for sensitivity, we were talking about earlier, right? When we were talking about cultural awareness and sensitivity. This affective domain encompasses the emotional aspects of learning and is pivotal in fostering attitudes, values, and feelings toward cultural understanding and empathy. Again, we're just at the understanding level. So when we do training, if we're not using the affective domain in our training objectives, right, it would be difficult to get to that value level in the affective domain, right? So if we're looking at the affective triangle, right, at the bottom of that, we have receiving or awareness, and then responding, participating. Valuing and appreciation is in the middle, all the way up to organizing, your values, integration, and all the way up to characterization, of the value, internalization. Okay, so at the very bottom, right, we progress from this initial awareness or receiving to a more profound internalization of values, characterization in 5 levels up to the top. Again, at the bottom, we receive. We are aware, right? We are receiving the information. Learners begin to recognize and pay attention. Right, we move to responding or participating. And it is here where learners actively engage in processes, and they're active, right? They are active. They show interest at responding and participation, and it's only the second level. It is at the valuing or appreciation stage of the affective domain of Bloom's taxonomy that learners attribute value to knowledge or experiences, people, and begin to impact their belief systems and attitudes. Right? I'm a big believer in storytelling as it speaks to experiences. When you tell, when you do storytelling, you're really talking about your experiences, which involves beliefs and values, right? Those beget actions and behaviors and eventually results. So when people tell you stories, there's a lot in there. So we have to be able to tell new stories, right? If we want change, assuming we want change. And then we go through organizing and integration, higher levels of these new values through characterization of value and internalization of behavior. So we can see why using more than just the cognitive domain of Bloom's is needed for fully effective learning objectives. Rarely used, mostly the cognitive domain. If you actually look at the objectives in your training, you can actually go on, you can Google it, and there's like a table full of words, keywords that can tell you which of these domains you're actually in. So fully effective learning objectives, right? It's a very high bar, and even in the middle, I'll take that. Valuing and appreciating is likely where we aspire to be on objectives. Anything more is a plus, but what we've seen is we only really get to the second level in any of these. Again, cultural awareness refers to recognizing and understanding, right? See, understanding, recognizing the difference and similarities between cultures. Even here, again, expectation, for whatever reason, is only at the second rung of the cognitive domain. To be competent, in my opinion, you have to at least be able to apply it, right, in the middle. Now, I submit a very low bar, this is, right, and we can do better. For example, maybe you receive the content, right, at the lower rung. You're receiving it, you're aware of it, and maybe you show interest at the next level, responding or participating, and that's where it stops. Likely no changes in attitude, value, or cultural practices occur. Very low bar indeed, right? So you're not competent enough, and in my opinion, shouldn't be competent. Again, this will be posted on the CIWlearning.net website as a web post, and also on the Dr. Bill 360 YouTube channel. The importance, or the so what, of cultural awareness and sensitivity is it enhances communication, reduces misunderstandings, and promotes more effective and respectful interactions. Some real life examples might be, think about how different cultures approach time. In some cultures, punctuality is critical. For example, in a business environment, while in others, a more relaxed approach is common. So understanding these differences can prevent frustration and miscommunication. For example, in a business, maybe we have some difficulties in the workplace, and we schedule a meeting at a specific time, and maybe some people may be culturally late. Sure, we've all maybe have experienced this. As a manager, right, we could consider it to be wrong, right? Maybe we shouldn't use the word wrong, but let's just say there's another way. If I was shouting at the person that was late in front of the others, maybe that's wrong. So the way I learned it, even in the military, I'd say something like, okay, excuse me, I need to see you outside, or I need to see you in my office, and do the needy, right? Do what I need to do, and then we come back. But I don't need to do it in front of everyone. So the impact of such relationships, right? Personal, right? It enhances empathy and builds stronger connections. Professionally, it improves teamwork and collaboration in diverse environments, leading to more innovative and effective problem solving. So the impact of cultural awareness and sensitivity will help communication flow, as we need to accomplish a lot of things to achieve the strategic objectives and vision of the organization for business impact. That being said, some people may have little to no intention of building rapport, empathy, etc. In the next segment on assessment, I talk about benchmarking this cultural awareness and sensitivity. I also talk about something called cultural intelligence. Specifically, that portion dealing with culture, CQ as it were, cultural quotient, one's knowledge and ability to understand and interact with different cultures. There are tests for this too. So here we're talking about control of bias and assumptions, affecting motivation and confidence in interacting with different cultures. We are taking control, and unless we have little motivation to do so, or maybe an explanation, right? Some people may not have or care to do so. So in this next segment, I'm going to talk about the IDI, or Intercultural Development Inventory assessment, stretching competence to capability. So the IDI, right, it's an assessment of one's cultural mindset or orientation on a 5-phase continuum, from denial through adaptation. From denial, polarization, minimization, where most people are. In fact, about 62% of the population are there. Acceptance and adaptation. I'm also going to talk about stretching that competence to something called intercultural capability. I am a qualified IDI assessor, IDI QA. So moving on, let's talk about the Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI as it's called, which is a powerful tool for assessing intercultural competence, a version of cultural awareness and sensitivity. Again, we call intercultural competence. It's been researched and validated. So we're talking about the cultural perspective or orientation and slant of your behavior that's been assessed. From missing differences to judging, de-emphasizing, to comprehending, to building bridges across these differences. Quite simply, the ability to communicate and interact effectively with people from different cultures. So what do? Right, you take the test. Again, the IDI is the assessment tool designed to measure an individual or group's intercultural competence, right? The capability to shift cultural perspective or orientation and appropriately adapt behavior to cultural differences and commonalities. Yes, there's a test for that. How does it work? Participants get a hold of a qualified assessor and answer a series of questions that gauge their intercultural mindset or orientation and behaviors. The results provide a profile that helps understand their current orientation of intercultural competence. It's basically mandatory to have an IDI QA assess the results, the exception being mass student enrollment, as there's a provision for that involves maybe minimal QA action, right? It involves the IDI student online individual debrief program available for QAs use to students only, and offered as a replacement to the face-to-face for very large groups like students. So when I talk about stretching competence, I'm referring to, right, going from being competent to having a capability to do more. So intercultural competence, right, you have the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, right, some orientational behavior with cultural differences. The other NKSAOs deals with personality traits, attitudes, and other qualities, right? The truth is, you just may not be competent for such interactions. Again, this is different from knowing and ignoring the KSAOs, right? There's a difference between knowing and ignoring. So intercultural capability, not necessarily a term we see widely discussed and validated. However, from my Ph.D. to the dissertation, right, the work product I had to produce after finishing the required credits, and not everybody who finishes the required coursework has a dissertation requirement or finishes it, right? This would be a Ph.D. ABD, all but dissertation. And there's no shame in that game, as it's very difficult and one's well-being is paramount. I have written one book, The Global Mindset, a Roadmap to Intercultural Competence in Business. And I'm currently writing 2 other books on intercultural competence from my dissertation. It's very common when you finish a dissertation to try and turn that academic language into a readable one for the public, right? And also the stakeholders who might be interested, academia, education, policymakers, etc. And then the other book, the third book, would be operationalizing that second book, right, for a business. So I'm using an aspiring business called HIS, Hamilton Information System, as an example. So my observation and understanding is that intercultural capability is the dynamic and adaptive application. Dynamic and adaptive. How agile one is. Stretching it, as it were. Stretching what? Stretching competence. Stretching intercultural competence, right? That empowers individuals and organizations to effectively navigate, lead, and innovate in culturally diverse environments. Competence is where you are. Capability is essential for fostering operational agility and strategic resilience, right? Being future ready. That ability to effectively navigate, lead, and innovate challenges, even unforeseen challenges, for example, possibly like COVID, in global markets and culturally diverse environments. This means being future ready, right? It makes it possible maybe to achieve the strategic vision. So some key subcomponents or constructs, as we might call it, of intercultural capability, based on my observation, the Ph.D., being a certified professional in talent development, an IDI QA, a world traveler in the military, 23 years of military service and traveling around. This is just me putting this together. So going from competence to capability might entail about 5 constructs or subtopics, as you can call it, dealing with, for example, contextual intelligence, cultural adaptation and integration, intercultural empathy and communication, proactive development and continuous learning, and strategic flexibility. So the first one I talked about was contextual intelligence. Contextual intelligence, that ability to swiftly interpret and respond to nuances in various cultural, economic, and digital contexts, ensuring agile decision making. For example, a manager might adjust marketing strategies for different regional markets based on local consumer behaviors and cultural sensitivities. Cultural adaptation and integration, the skill to seamlessly integrate behaviors, policies, strategies with diverse cultural perspectives, enhancing operational agility and fostering an inclusive culture. For instance, global teams may adapt their project management methodologies to incorporate the diverse working styles of members from multiple countries. Intercultural empathy and communication, right? So if you just refuse to talk or speak to others that are not like you, then that's another thing. You're probably not competent. Yeah, so you wouldn't even be talking about capability. The capacity, intercultural empathy and communication, is the capacity to empathize, right? You know, we say that a lot. So what does it mean, right? So we mean empathize, right, with diverse cultural viewpoints. The ability to do that. To communicate effectively across cultural boundaries. Promoting respectful and enriching interactions. For example, customer service reps are trained to recognize and respond appropriately to cultural backgrounds and customers, enhancing service quality and customer satisfaction. See, I learned early in the military about listening. For example, when people come to see me, right? I may be busy, right? I don't have to look up. I can hear, you know. However, how are you perceived? You know, when we go back to that, the affective domain, the triangle remember at the bottom, are you on the bottom rung? Are you just receiving, right? Or are you responding and participating, right? Active listening, etc. Or are you appreciating, even at the higher level? Remember the middle, competent, as I call it, valuing, right? You know, at that level for valuing, right? We're talking about experiences, talking about opinions, belief systems, right? Impacting that. How can we portray that? Appreciating, valuing, right? Is there something I can do? Right? Being supportive, right? In the last episode, I told the story of the individual who came to see me about his disabled child and the frustrations at work and at home, right? At home, his wife was given a lot of pressure to get the people moving on the changes for the house, to make, the ramp and everything, to make the house ready. It was delayed, and he was getting a lot of pressure there. He had a lot of pressure at work, and he came to see me. So, I needed to appreciate and value him and listen, respond. So the fourth one then for the construct is proactive development and continuous learning. A commitment to continuous improvement and anticipating future intercultural trends, challenges, supporting the sustained development of intercultural practices, right? This is how we stretch, right? Proactive development, continuous learning. For instance, multinational corporations may implement regular intercultural competence workshops to prepare employees for emerging markets, right? They may have individual development plans, stretching themselves, right? Involving global dynamics. One of the last ones in this construct for intercultural capability is strategic resilience and flexibility. The proficiency to manage and leverage cultural diversity for strategic objectives, adapting to challenges with resilience and preparing for future shifts, being future ready in support of the strategic vision and business impact. For example, companies, right, facing sudden changes in international trade policies, right, the ability to quickly adjust their operations using intercultural capability to minimize disruptions and seize new opportunities. So let's look at a real life scenario there. Let's look at a manager that's just competent. That's a good thing, being competent. So consider a manager expanding operations into a new international market who has intercultural competence. They have the knowledge, or KSAOs, about cultural differences and can apply their skills in various situations. They might use a basic cultural do's and don'ts to avoid misunderstandings and ensure respectful interactions. However, their actions, right, might be more reactive, right, following set guidelines rather than adapting fluidly to the nuances of each situation. Now, a manager with capability, right? This manager uses contextual intelligence to understand and respond to specific cultural, economic, and digital nuances of the new market. They don't just follow a checklist, right? But adapt marketing strategies based on local consumer behaviors and cultural sensitivities dynamically. I remember at one point, my department head told me that if your checklist, if you have a very, very thick checklist, then you don't know what you're doing. Provided you don't have a micromanager, right, for a boss, right, you can do these things, right, and you don't have to check with them with everything, that you're doing. I remember I was taking a course one time in Virginia when I was in the Navy on JLOT, Joint Logistics Over the Sea. And, at different junctures during the training, we were asked what we would do. And one particular individual, he would say, well, I have to call at the next break. I have to call back. He did that a couple times. And the guy said, hey, look, you need to get your stuff. You need to go back. They sent the wrong person here. If every time we do this, you have to call back to see if you can do it, then they sent the wrong person. You need to go. You know what your purpose is. So instead of having micromanagers, right, if they tell you what your purpose is, or what your purpose is in your organization, right, then you don't have to do that. You don't have to micromanage if you know what your purpose is. If you know what your purpose is, it's easier, right? You have an idea of what you need to do. So one with capability, right? A manager with capability, right? They exhibit cultural adaptation and integration by seamlessly integrating diverse cultural perspectives into their strategies, ensuring operational agility. Their policies are inclusive and foster a positive work culture. Their intercultural empathy and communication skills enable them to empathize with and effectively communicate across cultural boundaries, building strong relationships with local partners and employees. They prioritize proactive development and continuous learning, staying ahead of emerging intercultural trends and preparing their team for future challenges to be future ready. So through strategic resilience and flexibility, they navigate sudden changes in international trade policies by quickly adapting their operations, turning potential disruptions into opportunities. The first two segments, let us recap, right, what we talked about. We talked about cultural awareness and sensitivity, right, values. The IDI, right, the Intercultural Development Inventory and Intercultural Development Plan, IDPs, and how this helps. The IDP can help stretch that competence to capability based on where you are on the continuum, right? We mentioned the continuum. In the continuum, we went from denial to adaptation, denial, polarization, minimization, acceptance, and adaptation. So in the last segment, I'll talk about my dissertation and working on intercultural competence and teaching practices in the English as a foreign language online classroom. So my dissertation was on English as a foreign language, teachers' use of intercultural competence tests to inform teaching practices. So how does taking a test help inform teaching practice? I did mention what gets measured gets assessed, right? You'd be amazed at how many people don't like to get measured. Now, my Ph.D. was in organizational development and leadership, training, and e-learning. So how did I get to cultural awareness and sensitivity, intercultural competence, and talking about English? Maybe in another episode, I probably could talk about being a doctoral student and the trials and tribulations of such. But suffice to say, things in organizational development, there are a lot of things one can talk about. For example, personality traits and onboarding tests, right? Well, it's a thing. And I was thinking about that. I was studying that. A lot to do with personality traits. But it's very difficult to study or use it for research, personality traits, because not all the scholars agree on how to measure personality traits, right? So any instrument you use have to be researched. That has to be reliable and valid. And that's a whole nother discussion about tests, several different people from different angles. So they have to validate such tests and assessments. Measuring personality from different angles and multiple constructs, definitions, and operationalization was very difficult. So I was really struggling on how to come up with a topic. So I got in touch with my now late Uncle Orby, Dr. Orby Stewart, who passed away this week. May rest in peace. A lot of thanks to him. Right, he was in the Army, I was in the Navy, and on one level, we were connected that way. So I just called him up. Again, if you've ever been in a PhD program, for most of us, because I spoke with some of my mates, there's probably a point where you just want to break down and start crying. even if for a minute. Anyway, I called him, and as I was getting beat up on the personality research and trying to find an instrument, trying to find a dissertation topic, unable to come up with one, a researchable problem that I could attach to a viable research question that would help me answer a particular problem which I didn't have yet. So I was speaking with him, my Uncle Orby, Dr. Orby Stewart. He was doing research on something dealing with cultural awareness, something to do with the military. But the instrument he was using was from 1986. It was a Kushner instrument from 1986 on cultural awareness. It was too old, 20 years plus, right? So when you're doing research, you need to have something somewhere around 5 years, or else it's just problematic. So after getting off the phone with him, I came up with some things, like Kushner. I did some research in, Google and on the research systems at the university, which led to not only Kushner, but Mahone, Bennett, Hammer, and then things just started rolling and popping in. So I started thinking about my own work as a English as a foreign language teacher online. I was living in Malaysia, working for a foreign company with students from China, Taiwan, Japan, Indonesia, etc. And noticed that the content was still mostly Western. There are some thoughts on that. Well, some people believe that, hey, well, they want to learn about Western content, So I was thinking, well, we're trying to teach them grammar and pronunciation, right? English grammar and pronunciation, functional skills. But couldn't the content be relevant to the learners, right? Something that they need. For example, why couldn't we talk about the Great Wall or some art, Asian art? So this led me to my dissertation topic, right? Cultural awareness and sensitivity, valuing, others. So that's how I got to the topic, of my dissertation titled English as a Foreign Language Teacher's Use of Intercultural Competence Tests to Inform Teaching Practice. So this research focuses on teacher perceptions following an intercultural competence assessment and its implications for creating culturally responsive online classrooms. I was also looking for something more, essential for fostering global citizenship. So my focus was on global citizenship, right? We live on this planet. We should do something for it. So in this segment, I'm talking about the dissertation work and intercultural competence and culturally responsive teaching in the online classroom. Some points here, right? My research investigated how English as a foreign language teachers utilize intercultural competence tests to inform their teaching practice, right? It's not a mixed study where I take the results of the task and do some quantitative stuff to it and then ask some qualitative questions. It was just a qualitative research. The assessment test really was just to facilitate the start of a conversation of the interview. I would ask them about their perception of the test that they took, right? Because maybe they didn't think they should have scored that. My committee members for the dissertation said that I would not be allowed to collect raw scores, as this may be problematic and cause undue discomfort to the participants. So I was thinking in terms of low, medium, high, and using a stoplight system, green, yellow, red. So they bought that, and so that's what I did. So this is how it works. You give them the assessment, initiate the survey, right, or interview based on several questions around the research question. So we have a problem, why it's important, etc. We come up with a research question to help answer the problem. So this research question is made up of several elements, keywords. Each of those interview questions should hit those elements from different sides, but we should probably only have several of them. Okay. So several questions around a research question, right? And then, they answer a question. It could be some follow-up questions. So really, you're having more than 7 questions. So after they're finished, we get the transcript. We code it, right? See if we can come up with categories and things like that. The best analogy I can use is from a book, Dr. Fraser. She says, think about a puzzle. If you get a puzzle, you dump it, on the table, and you start saying, oh, okay, these parts look blue, these look green. Maybe it's a castle with a moat, right? And okay, this looks like part of the castle, and then you put the blue parts together. So you start categorizing things until you can get a picture. That's sort of what coding does. Then you analyze it. You discuss it, you interpret it. So it's not possible without a viable and real problem, though. So the fact that someone may like, a water hose or chocolate or something breaks, and that's a problem. It's not a purposeful problem, right? As the committee would say, so what? Your water hose broke or you don't like chocolate. That's not a real problem, right? So why is it important, right? Who benefits from this? The readers, etc. The research question, again, right, is made up of elements that are going to help me answer the problem. That's why I have a research question. These research questions, right, I need to ask interview questions to answer the research question. The research question is going to help me answer the problem, the gap in the research, so to speak. But again, altogether, it should be no more than 60 minutes. So I explored the perceptions of teachers following these assessments, analyzed how their insights might contribute to the development of culturally responsive teaching practices. So I didn't try to shape it, though. Right? They had the interview questions. I coded them, and I had to have a lens through which to look through the data. It's a conceptual framework, and in that context, it kind of led me to culturally responsive teaching practices. Right? It's important because this is how I can necessarily eventually get to global citizenship. As the reasoning or the purpose, the higher purpose. So during this, there were some key findings, right? Enhanced engagement and learning outcomes, right? I was able to come up with some foundational and advanced frameworks from the coding, objectives toward culturally responsive teaching. What does that look like? It helps to significantly boost student engagement, having a culturally responsive teaching practices or environment, right? Inclusive learning environment. It significantly helps to boost student engagement and learning by making students feel seen or valued. Remember, respected and valued. We call the affective domain of Bloom's. Not just receiving or participating, but appreciating and valuing. Some other key findings dealt with incorporating cultural backgrounds, right? Effective culturally responsive teaching involves weaving students' cultural identities, valuing them in the curriculum and teaching methods, making education more relevant and inclusive, right? I submit as an example, maybe from Gloria Ladson-Billings' book, Culturally Relevant Pedagogy, Asking Different Questions. I believe in it, she tells the story about a young lady in class, and because there was a culturally inclusive environment, she was able to ask the question, but she brought to the class's attention that there were liquor stores in the vicinity of the schools in her neighborhood. And it was problematic because of all that brought. The traffic, the people, people sleeping, problems. And so there was also a white guy in the class. So the white guy in the class says, no, that's not possible because there's a city ordinance, a perimeter around the schools for which that couldn't happen. They wouldn't have liquor stores. And she said, yes, there are. And the white guy suggested that he had relatives in the city council and government, and he could get a hold of the ordinance, and they could work on, fighting that, work on some kind of resolution, maybe speak at a meeting or do something, progress. So at this point, because it was a culturally, inclusive environment, right, culturally responsive environment, right, valuing, the teacher can kind of step back and let this happen. Let it happen. Now, we're not talking about protesting or anything, maybe, right? So when you have an environment like that, you can deal with real world issues, right? Locally, regionally, right? Again, globally aware citizens is what we want. Heaven knows we got a lot of global issues out there. So the dissertation, next, the interpretation of the findings, right? There were some major themes, there. Also cultivating culturally responsive learners, right? Taking the intercultural competence assessment catalyzed the participants to critically examine and reflect on their beliefs, behaviors, and experiences regarding their intercultural teaching practices. There was also findings and interpretation on intercultural awareness and sensitivity. This theme, right, was crucial to addressing the research question. It facilitated deep reflection of the participants, right, on creating a supportive and inclusive learning environment for culturally diverse students. A commitment to inclusivity. The participants' deep reflection demonstrated their understanding of the complexities of promoting intercultural competence and their willingness to adapt teaching practices to foster it. The importance in the context of global citizenship, preparing global citizens. In our increasingly globalized world, culturally responsive educational environments are critical for preparing students to be thoughtful, empathetic global citizens and stewards of our planet. God knows, right, we are consuming the planet's resources at a rate of 2.5, meaning 2.5 planets. Instead of one planet, where we can possibly rejuvenate, we should actually be consuming it at a less rate so more can grow. We're consuming it at a rate of 2.5 planets. Developing intercultural skills, right? So this approach encourages students not to only grasp academic content, but to develop skills necessary to interact respectfully and effectively with people from culturally diverse backgrounds. So as we conclude this episode, cultural awareness and sensitivity are crucial in today's connected world. I hope I've made that point. Tools like the IDI, or Intercultural Development Inventory, and follow-on development plans, IDPs, help us assess, right? Measure, assess, and improve, stretch our intercultural competence, turning it into a true capability, right? Intercultural capability. And as my dissertation highlights, culturally responsive teaching is a cornerstone for fostering global citizenship in education and in organizations, ensuring students and employees are equipped to thrive in a diverse and dynamic world. And according to McKinsey and Company, a report from them, companies that are ethnically and culturally diverse worldwide are more than 35 to 43% more likely to experience higher profits. If that's not a responsibility of stakeholders to consider, I don't know what is. If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone who could benefit. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us next time as we continue to explore transformational insights and strategies on Dr. Bill 360. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us and going on this journey with us with Dr. Bill 360, where we explore the intersection of organizational development, leadership training, e-learning, and cultural competence. Remember, every day is an opportunity to learn and transform. For more insights and resources, visit our website at ciwlearning.net or follow us on YouTube at Dr. Bill 360. Until next time, I'm Dr. Bill, and here's your 360-degree transformation. Keep learning, keep growing, and see you in the next episode.